Thanks, Brianna. Thanks to all of you for being here. We really appreciate you taking time to join us today for this important announcement. Let me do some introductions. So first, to my right, I'm joined by Colleen Melody, who you've seen before on cases we've had in the past. And next to me, to my immediate right, is Marcia Chen, both attorneys in our office. To my far left is a new addition to our legal team. We're really excited about LaRon Baker. We stole her away from the ACLU not too long ago, and she's been doing fantastic work in the office as represented by this particular case. And then to my immediate left is someone I think you all know, Jorge Barone. Jorge is the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project Executive Director and an individual and attorney who I have a great deal of respect for. Today I filed a lawsuit against a multi-billion-dollar out-of-state corporation that has been making millions of dollars by drastically underpaying its workers at the Northwest Detention Center. The lawsuit alleges GEO Group, Inc., the nation's second largest private prison contractor, is violating Washington state's minimum wage laws and, as a result, unjustly enriching themselves. On top of that, there are individuals in the community surrounding the detention center who may have lost out on work because GEO was taking advantage of essentially free labor. We believe this is the first time a state attorney general has brought claims like these. GEO operates the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma. The detention center houses individuals undergoing immigration proceedings, potentially facing deportation. These detainees perform virtually all the non-security work at the detention center. Since at least 2005, GEO has been paying immigration detainees $1 per day for their labor. Sometimes detainees are not paid in cash at all. Instead, GEO pays them in the form of snacks, chips or candy for their work. These detainees are part of civil immigration proceedings. They are not in jail. They're held in a private facility run by an out-of-state, for-profit corporation. Washington state's minimum wage laws provide broad protections for workers with very specific exemptions that do not apply here. The legislature took great care with how it crafted those provisions many decades ago. There is no exemption for private for-profit detention facilities. Let's be honest about what's going on. GEO has a captive population of vulnerable individuals who cannot easily advocate for themselves. This corporation is exploiting those workers for their own profits. So first, I'll tell you a bit more about the detention center and the GEO Group. Then I'll tell you what we learned from our investigation. Then I'll briefly go over our legal arguments. I'll turn over to Jorge for his remarks, and then we'll take your questions. The Northwest Detention Center is the fourth largest immigration detention center in the country. It can house up to about 1,575 immigrant detainees at a time. GEO has operated the facility for the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, since 2005. The Florida-based company has been in partnership with ICE since the 1980s. In 2015, ICE renewed GEO's contract for the Northwest Detention Center through 2025. At the time the contract was renewed, GEO projected the facility would bring in $57 million in revenue every year at full capacity. The detention center is one of GEO's 141 correctional and detention facilities. In 2016, GEO saw revenues exceeding $2 billion. It has a market value of almost $4 billion. GEO has, as you probably know, faced a variety of lawsuits, including a class action suit by current and former detainees at a Colorado facility alleging forced labor. The Northwest Detention Center has faced its own controversies, including multiple hunger strikes by detainees. As many as 750 detainees reportedly participated in one hunger strike earlier this year. Detainees protested living conditions, access to medical care, and other problems at the facility, including the low or non-existent pay that today's lawsuit is all about. I'll give you a brief overview of our investigation. Immigration detainees perform most of the work needed to keep the facility running in Tacoma. This includes preparing and serving food, running the laundry services, performing facility maintenance, and cleaning common areas and restrooms. If GEO did not exploit detainees to perform this work, these are jobs that might have gone to people in the community. Detainees told our investigators that the general practice is that guards ask for volunteers for work. If no one volunteers, sometimes guards assign the work to an individual. Some detainees said they didn't feel they could say no when asked to do this work. People describe working through the night, buffing floors and painting walls in exchange for chips and candy. Detainees in the facility told us that if a guard asked them to work on a special project later than the planned end of the shift, technically the detainee could stop working, but he or she will receive no compensation for the work they had performed, not even the dollar or bag of chips they were promised. Detainees also told us that for some work, GEO does not provide appropriate working gear, which has caused detainees physical pain and discomfort. Now I'll briefly mention our lawsuit and the claims that we have. We essentially make two claims. First, we argue that GEO is violating Washington State's minimum wage laws. So I want to be clear, this is a claim under Washington state law, not under federal law. These minimum wage laws are broadly written. We have some of the strongest minimum wage laws of any state in the country. And they're meant to protect as many workers in our state as possible. They've been on the books for decades, more than 50 years. I'm going to read to you what the law says about who the minimum wage does not apply to. It does not apply to any resident, inmate, or patient of a state, county, or municipal correctional, detention, treatment, or rehabilitative institution. There are no exceptions under Washington State's minimum wage laws for private, for-profit facilities like the Northwest Detention Center. Jails or prisons house individuals involved with the criminal justice system and are operated by state or local governments. In contrast, detainees at the Northwest Detention Center are held in a private, for-profit facility pending civil immigration facilities. Second, we argue that GEO unjustly enrich themselves. That's just a legal term for saying that essentially they unjustly, illegally made millions and millions of dollars. They profited from the illegal actions exploiting workers. They unjustly enriched themselves by their actions over more than a decade. So we're asking the court to order GEO to comply with Washington's minimum wage laws. I'm also asking the court to order GEO to give up the profits it made by underpaying its workers over these many years. The specific amount we'll be requesting is, as you might imagine, unknown at this time, but of course we expect it to be in the millions. If the court grants our request, we'll likely ask that any monetary award be placed into a trust or a cypre fund. That trust or fund would be dedicated to supporting people detained at the Northwest Detention Center and job seekers near the facility who may have lost out on employment opportunities because of GEO's illegal practices. So with that background, I'm going to turn over to Jorge Barone to provide his perspective on this action, the individuals who are detained at the facility, and I'll have a final comment, and then we'll open up with questions here in the room first, and then we'll go to the folks on the phone as well. Jorge, thank you so much for being here and your leadership on these issues. Look forward to your comments.
Thank you. Thank you very much. As you heard, my name is Jorge Barón. I'm the Executive Director of Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, and I'm here to express our organization's strong support for the action that Attorney General Bob Ferguson is taking today. Our organization provides legal assistance in immigration matters and the deportation hearings that people are going to while they're held at the Northwest Detention Center. And we have long been troubled by the conditions and the fact, really, that this facility exists in the first place. And as you heard, I think it's just really important for people to understand that this is a privately run facility. It is owned, the building and the facility is owned by a private corporation that is making, it last year reported over $160 million in profits with revenue in the billions. And those profits, as you're seeing today and as being made clear by this action today, are a result of the exploitation of people who are detained at the Northwest Detention Center. And I think it's really important to understand who the individuals are. Our staff and I personally have had the opportunity over the years to meet with people who are detained, and it's just important for community members to understand who ends up detained there. We're talking about people who get detained after being residents of Washington State for sometimes decades, people who have long ties to the community, who have families here, who are our neighbors, our coworkers, parents of our children at school. And the other folks who are there are people who are asylum seekers who came to the United States seeking protection because they've been subject to persecution in their home countries and are coming here simply to ask for protections that are available under immigration laws and are going through a process to determine if they're going to be qualified for that, and most of them have already gone through a screening where they've been found to have viable claims to be able to seek protection here. We also see people who are unaccompanied children, unaccompanied youth, who the moment they turn 18 are detained at the Northwest Detention Center, because as soon as they cross that boundary of becoming legally an adult, even though the day before they were unaccompanied children, they end up at the detention center. So these are the individuals that this multinational out-of-state corporation is exploiting right here in our state. And I think it's also important to note that the individuals who've been there, as Attorney General Ferguson mentioned, had been advocating for themselves and have been calling attention to their plight, and have engaged in hunger strikes and other actions to call attention to what's happening to them. And we should acknowledge the courage that they've had in speaking up in difficult conditions. And I see today's action as a way to respond to the concerns that they themselves have articulated. I think it's really important to note, too, that our federal government has not held the GEO Group accountable. They're supposed to be complying with state law as part of their partnership with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, but ICE is not taking those steps, and so I'm glad that our state is stepping up, and that this office, as it has repeatedly now, stepped up to say that the rights of all residents, all the people who live and who are here in Washington State, their rights need to be respected. And I think it's important to emphasize the point that Attorney General Ferguson made, that this is about the fact that if we don't allow people to be exploited in our state, that everybody benefits. Because when corporations are able to exploit a particular set of workers, that actually has impacts across the board for all workers across our communities. So again, we are very excited about this action. It's sad that we had to be in this place, but we commend the State Attorney General's office for taking this action and the legal team that is here, and I appreciate their support of all residents of our state. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jorge. And just a couple brief comments. I'm glad Jorge emphasized that federal government does require GEO to follow state laws in running that facility. And of course, it is our contention that they are flaunting our state minimum wage laws. Also, again, I just want to say thanks to the legal team. As always, they work very, very hard. These cases involve a good deal of investigation, legal research. Putting together these complaints is not easy, as you can imagine, but this is an important case. I'm proud that our office is bringing this lawsuit against GEO on behalf of the people of the state of Washington, and to specifically stand up for the detainees there, who literally are working for $1 a day or chips and candy for their work at the detention center. With that, we're all available to answer your questions, and we'll do our best for those on the phone to identify ourselves as we take your questions. Yeah, go right ahead.
So regarding the federal government's involvement, are they complicit in this, and why not are you going after the federal government since they're hiring prisoners?
You guys want to speak? I'll repeat the question for those on the phone. So the question goes to, I'm paraphrasing hopefully well, that are we suing the federal government? Are they in some way complicit with what's going on here with GEO not following state law? Does anyone want to? So this will be Lauren Baker.
Hi, this is Lauren. So we are not suing the federal government. We have sued GEO Group Incorporated, which is a private entity that owns and operates the Northwest Detention Center. Where we are right now is we want to ensure that any private company that's operating in the state of Washington complies with the state laws that are there to protect Washingtonians and that are there to ensure that all of the policies and protections that our state legislature have put in place are actually put in action. And so we sued GEO, not the federal government, because it is GEO that we believe are violating our state laws by not paying the detainees the minimum wage that they should be earning for working in a privately owned and operated immigration detention facility.
Yeah, hey, hang on, so go right ahead. I'll come to you next.
I understand this is under state law, but GEO has said in response to similar lawsuits that such voluntary programs are authorized by the federal government. So why not go after the federal government practices that allow this kind of voluntary programs overall, as opposed to just going after the one from the state?
Yeah, I think the question sort of restates, so why not going after the federal government? I mean, it's our contention, the federal government requires GEO to follow state law. GEO is not following state law. That's where our lawsuit is at this point. Is there anything further anyone wants to add on that? But I think that's essentially the answer to the question.
So
Yeah,
isn't the
yeah.
federal government negligent at that point?
So I don't think we have anything further to say on the federal government side, but our case is against GEO. It's their obligation to follow state law. That's their obligation to follow state law. They're not doing it.
But did this arrangement have to be approved by ICE? That's what I'm not clear on.
Oh, so the follow-up question is, did this arrangement have to be approved by the federal government or by ICE? You guys know this, Marcia? Marcia Chen will answer that.
Hi, I'm Marcia Chen. I'm in the Civil Rights Unit. ICE has detention standards that they say that GEO has to pay at least $1 a day, as well as comply with state laws. So it is our contention that there's no conflict between what federal law requires, state law requires is in addition. They sort of complement each other, and the federal government, as AG Ferguson has mentioned, GEO must comply with both their federal requirements as well as our state law requirements, and our state law requirements require minimum wage.
What prompted you to pursue this lawsuit? Was it, did your office start looking into it because of the hunger strikes, or what prompted your investigation or that found the detention?
Yeah, so the question goes to what prompted the investigation, this lawsuit. I guess a couple points, and others may want to chime in. I created the Civil Rights Unit in this office in 2015, and Colleen Melody was the first person hired to run that unit, and we chatted early on about the importance of reaching out to stakeholders around the state. Colleen, and then as her team grew, has been doing that since 2015 when she was hired, and we've chatted about how a consistent message she heard and the team heard and I have heard in the past couple years has been concerns about the detention facility from advocates, from folks like Jorge, and many, many others. And so it's been on our radar, I think it's fair to say, since the Civil Rights Unit was created. And I can say we began, I think, investigating this specific issue at the detention center in earnest earlier this year. And of course, any investigation takes time, develop the legal theories, have the interviews, that type of thing takes some time before you can bring the legal action. But I'd say the outgrowth came from the conversations that our team's been having with individuals around the state about concerns they have at the detention facility. The hunger strikes, of course, specifically on this issue, as I think I mentioned in my remarks, is the issue of wages for their work was a specific issue raised by detainees during their hunger strike. So yes, I think it's fair to say as well that the detainees advocating on their own behalf through the hunger strike helped raise the issue as well.
Sir, I know it's a long way down the line, but will detainees that was affected, will they get back pay?
So the question is, will the detainees who were impacted, acknowledge this does go back more than a decade, will they get essentially back pay for their lost wages? I think it's too soon to say how that's going to play out. You are right, there are some challenges with that, just given the number of years that's gone on. It may be difficult in some circumstances to track down individual workers. Much may depend on the records that GEO has kept about individuals and how much they worked. But that's something that obviously we're going to be looking at as this litigation moves forward. We're at the early stages here of filing our complaint, but that is something that we'll be looking at as this complaint goes forward.
You said
Yeah,
they're
Matt.
paid $1 in chips and candy. Under the state law, what should they get paid?
So the question goes to that they were restating that they were paid $1 a day or sometimes chips or candy. What should they have been paid? The law is clear. They should have been paid the state's minimum wage at the time that they were working. And our state law is very, very clear on that. I mean, I took the time to read the actual exception because I think I suspect a lot of folks might think, well, hey, wait a second, Bob, isn't this more like a jail or something, right? And our state jail doesn't pay minimum wage. The exception is very, very specific and very, very narrow, right? And does not apply to a private entity for individuals who are facing civil proceedings, not criminal. So the exception for what we all consider sort of our state jails, criminal proceedings, most certainly does not apply here. They're obligated to follow state law when transacting their facility here in Washington State, and they simply haven't been doing it, not even close. I mean, $1 a day, give me a break, right? We're not even in the ballpark. So we think the impact to GEO financially could be significant with this case.
Were they aware of this exception, and what was their response when told? Did they stop this practice of paying $1 a day yet? Or?
Question goes to whether what's GEO's response been to this, if any. I guess I'm going to turn to the legal team to see if there's anything we want to say about that.
So we have not affirmatively reached out to GEO to reaffirm to them their obligations under the state law, but their contract that they entered into with ICE and their longstanding practices puts them on notice that they should actually be complying with the state law. So they know, or they should know, what their obligations are. But in terms of any response or any particular internal discussions about why they have continued to pay $1 a day, we don't know. What we do know is that they're obligated under our state law to pay detainees and anyone who's working in their privately owned facility the state minimum wage, and they are not doing so.
And for those on the phone, that was Laurent speaking. Let's do another one here, and then I'll take the phone, then I'll come back to the folks here, if that's okay. Okay, we'll do 2 more here, then I'll go to the phone. Go ahead.
Yeah, this has been going on since at least 2005. Were there missed opportunities to take this action long ago?
Well, I can't, look, I can speak for myself. I've been Attorney General now, it's my 5th year. Created the Civil Rights Unit in 2015, specifically in part to address what I felt was work that needed to be done on behalf of all the people of the state of Washington on civil rights issues and on wage issues. So I can't speak to the past, right? What I can speak to is the issues we heard from advocates and community members and from detainees themselves as a result of our investigation, our listening tour, and speaking to detainees at the facility. And we think we have a strong case, and we feel good about our chances in court. Yes?
Two questions. So will we have a copy of the lawsuit when it's
Yeah, the question is, do we have a copy of the lawsuit? I'm just going to turn to Brianna. Is that online now, Brianna?
Right now, yes.
So a copy of the lawsuit should be available online right now. Thanks for asking that. I'm going to go ahead. Yep.
Just a couple of questions. And for people who might not know very much about detention or the way it works, I mean, can you list examples of places of where it would be okay to not pay, inmates minimum wage? Like the jail, an example of that. What other kind of facilities?
Yeah, so the question goes to, hey, what type of facilities in Washington State is it legal to not pay a minimum wage? I'll make sure, I'll turn to my legal team for that, just make sure we get it exactly. I think I've stated, but if you guys want to restate that again, that'd be great.
Sure. This is Marcia from the Civil Rights Unit. There's a whole host of exemptions to the minimum wage law, but they're very specific. The one that we've already referenced is whether it's state, municipal, jails, those that are punishing inmates for a criminal conviction. Another example might be where people are required to sleep where they work, and that's usually thinking of like cruise ships. Cruise ship workers not getting paid for the time that they're sleeping on the boat. So there are very specific examples that we don't think apply here.
And just to be, on our minimum wage laws, Washington State has very broad minimum wage laws. The legislature's been very clear about that, and we think that's what, in part, makes our case so strong, is those exceptions are specific, and they're narrow, and they certainly don't apply to a for-profit corporation coming into our state and running a facility like this. One more, and then I'll turn to the phone.
Okay, and that they are the only ones running the facility, there isn't another corporation involved?
That's correct. The question was, is GEO the only entity running the facility? And the answer is yes, they are. Is there anyone on the phone who'd like to ask a question at this time?
Yeah, I have a question. This is Nina Shapiro, Seattle Times.
Go right ahead, Nia.
So I want to be clear on what you'd like to see. Would you be satisfied if GEO employed detainees but paid them minimum wage, which I believe is $11 an hour, correct me if I'm wrong, or do you want to see other people employed in the detention center?
So I think the folks could hear the question in the room. I think the question went to what we want to see from this. In other words, I think what you're asking is, does it make a difference to us once GEO is following the law? And I think that's number one. And what we're seeking, number one, is they need to start following the law. They need to start paying the workers the minimum wage. The question is, does it make any difference to us whether it's, I think you're asking whether it's detainees who are doing that work as long as they're paid the minimum wage, or individuals who are not at the facility as long as they're paid the minimum wage. Is that what you're asking? Yeah, that is correct. It doesn't, GEO simply needs to follow the law. So if they wish to pay detainees minimum wage or workers from outside the facility minimum wage, that is acceptable to us.
Okay. And if I could ask a follow-up question to clarify on the law, when you were talking about the exemption, you mentioned a couple things. One being it was a private facility, and the other being that it was for people undergoing civil, not criminal proceedings. So just to clarify, could a private facility operated jail, would they be exempt from the minimum wage law?
I believe the answer is no, but I'll have one of the members of the legal team answer that. So you're saying a private facility, a private entity running a jail, right, is the question?
Exactly.
Yep. Go ahead, Laurent.
So the exemption to the minimum wage law exempts any facility that's run by a municipality, a county, or a state government entity that is an institution. So a jail, a prison. There are a few other examples, but the operating factor in the exemption is that it's a government institution. And so I think that means that, or we believe that that means that no privately run facility would be open to avail itself of the exception of the minimum wage. So any privately owned institution that is detaining people, regardless of the purpose, would need to pay the minimum wage to people who are working there because the exemption only applies to government entities.
And that was Laurent Nina answering, but just to emphasize again, that of course is not our case, right? The individuals at the Northwest Detention Center are facing civil proceedings, not criminal, very important distinction. And of course, this is most certainly not a government entity that is in charge of the facility. So on both those counts, we feel they do not meet the exception, the narrow exception set by the legislature.
Okay, thanks. And I am correct, it's $11 now, the minimum wage, and if you know what it was in 2005, would you let me know?
We can, it's in the complaint, there's a chart in the complaint. So Nina, there's a chart in the complaint that should detail wage during the relevant years.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Anybody else on the phone have a question? I thought I heard someone else trying to jump in.
Yeah, this is Jim Camden from the spokesman review.
Go ahead, Jim.
And I was wondering if your office reached out to ICE or the Department of Homeland Security, since they have the contract with GEO, to say, hey, your contract, the person you're contracting with is not following state law.
The answer is no, I see to that. Yeah, the answer to that is no. The entity who has the obligation to follow law and follow their contract is GEO. That's the entity, and that's who our lawsuit's against. Is someone else, I think, was trying to jump in with a question online on the phone?
Well, it's Maria Pinto with Albion, just to follow up on that one, GEO is contract, so couldn't I say we're gonna rescind your contract if you're not complying with state law?
I think the question was sort of a hypothetical of, hey, could the federal government rescind the contract with GEO because they're not complying with state law? I'm not sure anyone on the legal team wants to address that. Either one.
yeah.
This is Colleen Melody.
Hi, yeah, this is Colleen Melody. So the answer to that is sure. I mean, that's up to the federal government. If they want to take a contract action against GEO, that's presumably a power that they would have. You know, our job is to enforce state law here in the state. We're not a party. We didn't sign a contract with the federal government, and we didn't sign a contract with GEO. We have an obligation to enforce the law. So the question about whether ICE could or maybe wants to do something is a good question for ICE.
Any other questions on the phone before I turn it back in here for a couple final questions?
Yeah, this is,
Go ahead.
This is Corey Klein with the FAFSA magazine. Could you describe the investigation a little bit and to what extent GEO is cooperative or not cooperative?
The question for those in the room is describe the investigation, whether GEO was cooperative or not cooperative. I guess, do you guys want to address, we had folks in our team who were at the detention center meeting with and interviewing detainees. Laurent, do you want to speak? So this is, Laurent will speak to that a bit more.
Hi, this is Laurent Baker. So the investigation has gone on for months, and it covered a variety of grounds. So we had listening events where we talked to community members, we reached out to advocates. There were trips to the detention facility to talk to individuals who were detained and who were participants in the work program. One of the attorneys took a tour of the facility to sort of get the lay of the grounds. In terms of whether or not GEO was helpful or amenable, we actually focused our investigation into the experiences of the impacted communities, so detainees and then the advocates who work with detainee populations.
So then back to folks in the room. Any final questions here in the room? We'll be available afterwards for one-on-one if you have some questions. Yes.
If these detainees are in the process of deportation, I think that implies they don't have a work permit. How can GEO even hire them?
So I'll repeat the question. So the question is, how can GEO employ these individuals? Is essentially the question. So does anyone, Marcia, go ahead.
I would just, this is Marcia, I would just add, it's just a clarifying point. Everyone in GEO's facilities aren't necessarily undocumented or without work authorization. Some of them are with work authorization. So the premise is, just want to clarify that there are people who are work authorized who are in GEO's facilities who are being paid $1 a day. And in terms of, GEO's obligations in terms of complying with federal law, that's not what this lawsuit is about. This lawsuit is about our state laws and whether or not, the detainees should be paid a minimum wage, and it is clear from our state laws that they apply to undocumented and documented folks alike.
So I think that the question is a good one because it's important for us to reinforce sort of again, right? GEO has its own obligations to the federal government. They have a contract with the federal government. As I think as Marcia and others have said, we are not a party to any of those contracts. We, the state, are not a party to that. It's a contract between GEO and the federal government. So they have obligations under that contract with the federal government. We have an obligation in the Attorney General office to enforce our state laws. And GEO is violating those because as an out-of-state company doing business here as a civil entity, they have to follow our state laws, all of them. And they're not doing that in this case. So our focus here in our litigation is on GEO specifically.
The class action lawsuit about the Colorado facility that GEO operates alleges that there was violations of anti-slavery and forced labor laws. Does your lawsuit allege that these workers were forced into working for these wages? And if not, why not pursue it, I guess, on those grounds as well about there being forced labor violations?
So the question goes to why not claim a sort of forced labor violation similar to in the Colorado case? What's going on there? Does anybody want to address that one?
Sure.
LaRon?
Hi, this is LaRon Baker. So our lawsuit doesn't include the forced labor claims, in part because the facts as we know them currently are very different from what was occurring in Colorado. However, as our lawsuit progresses and as we do further discovery, if we find that the factors on the ground would support such a claim, there's a potential we might investigate bringing that. But as we understand right now, there's a very different experience that are happening for detainees around the forced labor aspect between Colorado and what's happening here.
Are you alleging that it's voluntary for most of these folks in the facility, in our facility?
The program is definitely called a voluntary work program. We have people who have indicated that they feel compelled to engage in the program, but there are also people who have indicated that they do feel like it's a completely voluntary program. And so I think as the lawsuit goes forward and as we do more discovery, we'll learn a little bit more about sort of what it's like for more of the people who are detained in the facility.
Do you have a sense of how many detainees we're talking about are affected by this, and what percentage of the population right now might be working?
So the question's a good one about how many folks do we think have been impacted by this or have been working over the last decade plus there. That is an unknown number. We think there are many, many, of course, but it's an unknown number at this time. As this litigation goes forward, we hope to get more information on that. But it's, as we've mentioned here a number of times, outside of sort of the security work done at the facility, right? The bulk of the work outside of the security work is done by detainees. So this is a large facility that houses up to 1,500 folks at any one time. You can imagine that's a lot of work to keep that place running. So there is a significant amount of work performed by detainees at that $1 a day, but we can't give you an exact, we can't quantify that precisely at this time for obvious reasons. Now, look, as the litigation goes forward, we expect to get more information and hope to have more details on that as this litigation goes forward. Well, the chance, in other words, in litigation, you can ask for documents, you get discovery, you take depositions, you have a chance to get that information from GEO. So we expect to have, hope to have more information, more specific information as this goes forward.
What's the end game here, sir? I mean, is it a chance that this facility might be shut down?
The question is, what's the end game? Is there a chance it might be shut down? I guess I can't speak to the future of the facility. What I can speak to is that GEO has to follow the law. Businesses make their decisions, but they have to make them based on the law and following the law, right? And that's not happening here in a significant way. So I'll leave that to GEO to decide how they want to handle their business in light of the fact that they'll have to follow state law and pay those workers $11 an hour. That's up to GEO. You have to ask them what they want to do. We're focused on making sure they follow the law while they run an operation here in our state. Go ahead.
Just practically speaking, I mean, were the detainees actually just handed a dollar bill when they were being paid for the work, or how did it work?
So the question, we'll make this the last one, and I'll see if Jorge has a final thought or wants to respond to anything before, is I think the question went to just mechanically, how did this work? Were detainees literally handed a dollar bill at the end of a day's work? How mechanically did that work? Does somebody want to address that?
It is our understanding that the detainees are not handed $1 a day. The dollar is credited to their commissary account, and then they're able to utilize that dollar to purchase items from GEO from the commissary, either food or other products that they need for their daily care.
So before a final thought, Jorge, is there anything from we had a series of questions, there anything you want to add to?
I think we're good.
Okay, so, but again, I want to express my thanks to Jorge and the work that he and his entire team does on behalf of the people of the state, my legal team as well, for their work bringing this case. And, you know, what's happening at the detention facility is not right. Folks are paid $1 a day for doing hard work. It's our obligation to make sure that the laws adopted by our state legislature and reinforced by the people of our state through the initiative process to raise the minimum wage are enforced. And right now, GEO is not doing that. So we'll be asking for as they start following the law, and we'll have to pay back. I want to make sure we're clear on this, that they pay back the profits they made off the backs of those exploited workers over more than a 10-year period of time. So they should not be allowed to profit off this. They need to pay that back, and that's what we'll be seeking with the court as we move forward. Thank you all so much for being here. We're available for one-on-one conversations if you have them, and feel free to follow up with Brown, of course, as well. Thanks for your interest, and thanks for being here, everybody.